Good afternoon. This is Mary Ann Fowler, Senior Vice President of Federal Relations, Rails to Trails Conservancy, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to this discussion on how the new federal legislation, MAP 21, will impact us, the advocates, the trail builders, the bike ped planners, those who love trails and believe in walking and biking. Although we've gathered a pretty savvy crew for our panel, we do not have all the answers. Indeed, it is our hope that the dialogue this afternoon will help flush out and identify points needing clarification or amplification so we can move quickly forward through guidance and be ready for implementation when Phase 2 of MAP 21 kicks in on October 1st. So, you are a key part of the process now, both in guiding guidance and leading the implementation of Section 1122, Transportation Alternatives. So, info for participants. This webinar will be as interactive as possible. Following short presentations from our three panelists, we will open the floor for Q&A. And although the webinar is scheduled to end at 2 o'clock p.m., we promise to stay on the cyber line until we have responded to every last question. How do I ask a question, you might ask? You do so by using that chat box on your computer screen. This should appear on the right-hand side of the screen. Simply type your question into the dialog box. Staff here will review incoming messages and will pass your questions on to the panel during Q&A. We will also be asking you a few questions during the webinar to get an idea of where you're from and your relationship with your local DOT, MPO, TMA, etc. This will give us a better idea of who is in the audience so that we can make sure we address the issues that are of greatest concern to you. Okay, the panel. On the panel today, we have a group of the foremost experts in American transportation policy and funding legislation. There are their pictures. You see them. First, Kevin Mills is RTC's Vice President for Policy and Trail Development. Kevin oversees RTC's policy agenda, including federal and state legislation, grassroots movement building, program initiatives, and research. Prior to joining RTC in 2006, Kevin spent more than 15 years at Environmental Defense, directing programs to reduce the climate and health impacts of automobiles, reduce the use and waste of toxic chemicals, and promote sustainable transportation and communities. David Talia. Next slide. David Talia is the Senior Government Affairs Manager for the National Recreation and Park Association. Dave joined NRPA's Public Policy Office in 2011. He is responsible for the development and execution of NRPA's advocacy strategy. David has more than 20 years of legislative and policy experience on issues ranging from international tax and trade to youth sports, recreation, and transportation, and served on the legislative staff of both U.S. Senator Dan Coates of Indiana and U.S. Representative Dave Camp of Michigan. Next slide, please. And it's so often the case here in Washington, we had a last-minute substitution from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Joining us today in lieu of Polly Trottenberg will be Beth Osborne. Beth joined the U.S. Department of Transportation as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy in 2009. She has worked on the development of the Surface Transportation Reauthorization and is currently focusing on the Tiger Discretionary Grant Program, the Secretary's Livability Initiative, as well as safety and environment issues. Before joining U.S. DOT, Beth worked for Senator Tom Carper of Delaware as his legislative assistant for transportation, trade, and labor policy, including work on Safety Lou and the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. Previously, Beth worked as the Policy Director for Smart Growth America and as Legislative Director for Environmental Policy at the Southern Governors Association. She began her career in Washington, D.C. in the House of Representatives, working as a legislative assistant for Representative Ron Klink of Pennsylvania and as Legislative Director for Representative Brian Baird of Washington. Beth grew up in New Orleans and graduated with a BA and JD from Louisiana State University. She currently resides in Washington, D.C. with her husband and 2 children. And a brief word about myself. I have been at RTC for well, let's see, since 1988, I was keenly involved in the ICE-T, T21, and Safety Lou reauthorization. In addition to my role at RTC, I co-chair the Coalition for Recreational Trails, and I'm second vice chair of American Trails. I co-authored Trails and Trailways for the 21st Century and collaborated with faculty at the Harvard School of Public Health in researching and writing factors associated with federal transportation funding for local pedestrian and bicycle programming and facilities, and I did not choose the title. So let us begin our content of our webinar. And so Kevin Mills, RTC Policy par excellence. Take it away.
Thank you, Marianne. So MAP 21 stands for Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act. And I would argue that that name is ironic because it's a step backwards from a trails, walking, and biking perspective. But at the same time, we maintain the program structure that's going to allow us to keep moving forward. And so my optimistic theme for the day is that we're going to be making the most of transportation alternatives. So that's the section of MAP 21, which consolidates our three core programs: transportation enhancements, that term will no longer continue, safe routes to school, and the recreational trails program. The making the most portion of this is going to require us to organize, to influence states in terms of how they use the flexibility they have under this law, as well as how local governments handle their increased role. Next slide. So let's get into how the new law changes the rules of the game. So the transportation alternatives section is where our dedicated dollars are. And that's what a lot of this debate's been about, is will there be dedicated dollars and what will that look like? The conference committee improved on the Senate bill in at least one respect by reestablishing the tie of transportation alternatives to the Highway Trust Fund. So you basically have 2% of the Highway Trust Fund minus the mass transit portion of it. And that could then rise, those dollars could rise if the whole Highway Trust Fund rises. The Senate bill had locked us into 2009 transportation enhancements levels of funding for all those programs put together. So what are the losses here? We have less money. There's an initial cut of nearly 30% from the Safety Lou levels and from about 10% as compared to the Senate bill. There's less certainty. There are three ways you can transfer the transportation alternatives money away. First, there's an opt-out provision where states can transfer up to half of the transportation alternatives money to core highway programs. There's a use it or lose it provision in which states can transfer unobligated balances of more than a year of transportation alternatives funding to what they call the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, so that if you take that excess over a year of unspent funds, and that can be sent over to fund what they call CMAQ projects. And then there's a third having to do with emergencies like natural disasters. I'm less worried about that one. There's another aspect in which we've got less certainty as well, and that's because there's expensive new competition in this bill, but more about that later. Before that, I want to speak to where we also have eligibility for further dollars, and there's continuation of eligibility of trails, bicycling, and walking in several other very big highway programs. Most notably, the Surface Transportation Program. That was home to our transportation enhancements set aside in the past, and this is commanding over 29% of the federal aid highway dollars. These are flexible dollars that are very coveted by state DOTs, but the competition for those dollars is going to be stiffer than ever because there are new demands on that pot. It's also the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and again, I mentioned the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, where there also is going to be less dollars and more eligibility. Now let's take a look a little bit about the flow of dollars through the Transportation Alternatives Program. First, there's going to be some recreational trails dollars taken off the top. David will speak to that in a few minutes. Then you take the money that's in the pot and you split it half and half going to areas in proportion to their population and the other half going to any area of the state. And that half that goes to any area of the state is the portion for which the state can opt out of those funds and send those funds off to other highway programs, right? But if they don't, then they take those funds as well as the funds that are to be allocated based upon population, and they will run a state competitive grant program for all of those funds, for the medium-sized communities, the small community money, and then any area of the state money. And the eligible entities for that are local governments, metropolitan planning organizations, transit agencies, natural resource. Okay, we had technical difficulties. We understand you may be back. Please use the chat window to tell our administrator you're there. Thank you. So let me back up just a little bit because I don't know where we cut off. So these state competitive grants will be going to the eligible entities, mostly local entities, and not the state DOTs themselves. The regions of 200,000 and above, those metropolitan planning organizations, which will no longer be called Tier 1 and Tier 2. They're going to be called Transportation Management Areas. And these big MPOs for the bigger areas are going to run their own, going to be sub-allocated dollars based upon their proportion of the population, and then they're going to run their own competitive grant programs for their areas that way. Applicants are going to do a 20% match just as they have in the past. Okay, next slide, please. All right, let's take a closer look at eligibility. There are a number of notable things that are added. First of all, there is, in addition to our 3 core programs, there is now a 4th eligibility for the planning, design, and construction of boulevards and other roadways, largely in the right-of-way of former interstate routes or other divided highways. This is something that will be very important, how it is interpreted. It has we hope that it will be interpreted narrowly. The intent, we understand, of the negotiators was this was something to help I-10 in Louisiana. Some of the words look more wide open than that. It'll be an important interpretation issue we'll be working on. If it is interpreted broadly, we'll have some vulnerability for both those local and for those state funds. Then the environmental mitigation is another new area in which it's very much broadened in the transportation alternatives definition. Basically, the word any is used there, and that's going to be an important interpretation issue. But it's things like stormwater management, wildlife connectivity, and then wetland banking at the state level, for instance, which would be plays into this theme we have now, where previously it was prohibited to use these dollars for regulatory compliance. They were about improving the system, but now that's one of the focal points of this. So whether it's NEPA compliance or whether it's archaeology issues or whatever, there are a number of examples of where this compliance theme now comes out. Another addition is safe routes for non-drivers. This is an area that is positive, and so it could be positive for us. Safe routes to school can come into the definition here, but it broadens that much to be safe routes to everywhere for everyone, and that could be an opportunity to focus some resources on building active transportation systems. There are a number of things left out. Bicycle and walking safety is an unfortunate omission. Transportation museums, scenic and historic easements, tourist and welcome centers, and then beautification. Now, interestingly, wildflowers have been made an example of people who oppose these provisions, but now they would be clearly allowed as erosion control, which is normally the purpose of those plantings. But it probably will count out some things we've known to be used T for, like art and street furniture. Next slide. Let's take a little look at one state and how the money would flow through this transportation alternatives section. This is my native state of Michigan. US DOT would do its apportionment, I believe, on October 1st. That would flow down to each of the states. In the case of Michigan, their share of TE funds in 2009 was about 3.2% of the nation's money. So that's going to be their share of these new transportation alternative dollars. That 2% formula, it comes in as Michigan getting 3.2% of that national amount. Then that's about $26 million in fiscal 13. Then the state's going to look at what it's going to participate in, and then it's going to run its state competitive grant program, and then it's also going to then have money cascade based upon population of the state. So here's where looking at one state can help us understand this. So for that half of the money that goes by population, you've got these red outlined areas. These are your, under the new parlance, will be transportation management areas, or big MPOs. In the state of Michigan, 68.4% of the population lives in such areas in the aggregate. So each of those areas is going to be suballocated an amount, a proportion to essentially half that, to administer themselves for project selection. So 34.2% of the overall pot goes to those areas to manage themselves. The medium-sized areas you see as little yellow blobs here and there around the state. Those are your small and medium urban areas. Those make up 13.1% of Michigan's population. So in the aggregate, 6.5% of the overall pot is going to need to flow to those areas. Not any one particular area, but areas of that size. Then, likewise, all these green areas without any such designation are going to be communities of less than 5,000, and you're going to get 9.25% of the money in Michigan, at least, flowing to such communities, right? So that's the way money flows through a state. And with that, I would just note that there's a decision the governor would make back at the beginning of this, when they look at their $26 million, and that would have to do with the Recreational Trails Program. And with that, then I'd like to hand this over to David to explain that program.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Dave Talia with the National Recreation and Park Association. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate today. NRPA is an association of more than 12,000 publicly funded state and local park agencies across America. Our mission is to advance parks, recreation, and environmental conservation efforts that enhance the quality of life for all people. At the risk of dating myself, I had the pleasure of working on Capitol Hill at the time that ICE-T, the original major intermodal transportation law, was crafted in 1992. I'd like to remind current congressional staff that the I in ICE-T stands for intermodal. It was an attempt to look at our nation's transportation policy from a broader and more interconnected perspective. That's where NRPA's interest in transportation policy lie. We believe transportation connections to public lands and parks are an essential component of transportation policy and planning, and have been so for more than 3 decades. Public open areas, including recreational trails, parks, and green space, are considered essential to attracting and retaining a diverse, vibrant, and economically healthy community. Finally, as we've been working on this at NRPA, we've been trying to prepare our membership for the major policy changes we thought coming down the pike, so to speak. And now that we have a new 2-year law in MAP 21, we're urging our agencies to engage and lobby their state legislatures and governors in support of walking and biking funding if they're not doing so already. That brings us to the Recreational Trails Program specifically. From this point, you'll often hear me referring to it as RTP. The Recreational Trails Program provides money to the states to develop and maintain recreational trails and trail-related facilities for both non-motorized and motorized recreational uses. This includes hiking. To date, RTP has funded more than about 13,000 projects and has awarded over $900 million in matching federal grants to states for walking and biking activities. It's important to recognize that RTP has a unique history as well as a dedicated funding source. It was passed in 1992 under ICE-T, and its funding source comes from a portion of the gas tax revenue to the Highway Trust from off-road motorized recreational vehicles, such as snowmobiles and ATVs. This is often referred to as a user fee, as those who directly benefit from the program are helping to pay for it. The law has also required 2 things of state participants historically: to form an RTP Trails Advisory Committee to guide the program, composed of both motorized and non-motorized. There we go, get to the right slide. Sorry, excuse me about that. The law has also required 2 things of state participants, to make that clear: to form an RTP Trails Advisory Committee to guide the program, composed of both motorized and non-motorized stakeholders. These advisory groups are now recognized as the leaders who play a critical role in the development of our local and regional trail networks. And also, number 2, that the state's funding that they receive be awarded through a competitive process, which grant funds obligated for specific trail uses, and it divides up in the following ratio or proportion. 30% of the funds go for motorized trails projects, 30% for non-motorized, and 40% for multi-use trails, which cover a wide variety of uses. That's that 30-30-40 distribution. Moving ahead, and let's look at MAP 21. And excuse the pun for using moving ahead as part of MAP 21. The new law preserves the program's unique structure. Kevin stated earlier, MAP 21 preserves the dedicated funding for RTP, as he's kind of put it, cutting it off the top when TA funding is being allocated. And it's at FY 2009 levels, and that was what was found under the current expiring law known as Safety Loop. That's approximately $85 million per year going to the program. In short, the program primarily remains unchanged, except that it allows the governor, and it specifically identifies the governor in the Act, to opt out of the program annually. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions about how that may work, so I'll leave that out there on that issue. But again, this is critical that you engage your state legislatures, DOTs, and in the case of recreational trails program, the governor in support of funding for walking and biking. Finally, to learn more about the RTP program, including the anticipated apportionment levels for your state, again, the FY 2009 levels, please visit the Federal Highway Administration's homepage for the Rec Trails program. It's listed at the bottom of the slide on the screen. And I don't really want to read it out to you because it's real complicated, but hopefully you can see it there. We'll certainly share it with you later. Once there, you can go to the funding levels by state link, which will direct you to the annual apportionment for each state. In particular, again, we're interested in the FY 2009 apportionment levels. And for example, referring back to Kevin's Michigan explanation, for FY 2009, RTP apportionment for Michigan was approximately $2.85 million, or about 11% of the state's overall transportation alternatives funding. So thank you very much. I'll be able to take your questions later.
Thank you, David. So I just want to do one more slide, which is about how we make the most of MAP 21, just thinking about our strategy going forward. And there are really three things I'd like to point us to, and then we can get into it more when we get to the question and answers after Beth speaks. But the first is that we obviously need to give some attention to preventing states from opting out of the program. That would go for both the Recreational Trails program as well as any area of the state funds under transportation alternatives generally. And one thing I would note, while that sounds like a defensive move, there is probably a corresponding offensive move, which is that at least one state I know of, Oregon, is contemplating making the program whole using flexible surface transportation program funds to keep transportation alternatives activities as a whole at the level they have been. So that's something to consider depending on what the politics are in your state. Second, we want to ensure that there are timely, successful grants. We've got to get the money spent, because, in part because of those use it or lose it provisions I had mentioned earlier. We also want to be showing the demand for these programs and their value through doing good projects. And that's going to be some of the best preparation we can do for the next fight we're going to have federally over this bill in 2014, as well as for what's found to be a more prominent local and state role going forward. You want to, be showing that success on the ground. One thing I'd note in this regard is the state of California has, up till now, been particularly notable in the way they sub-allocate their funds to local entities, and they, of course, will continue doing that according to the new rules, but are looking at doing some state legislation that would continue sub-allocation at that higher level that they've been accustomed to. And so that's another interesting model for us to think about. The third thing is that there's an existing pipeline of projects out there, and we want to make sure that we're obligating the program projects. So there's going to be one opportunity here for anything that's really ready to go between now and the end of September when the rules change, right? We're still operating under safety new rules through September. For that period, getting these obligated is one way to make sure nothing untoward happens to those existing projects. But after that, it's going to be a matter of political will on a state-by-state basis, and we're going to all want to go to bat to make sure funds are preserved. And so last thing I'd note, in doing those three things, I think that we're going to all need to work together and pull together and work hard, and that's going to strengthen our movement at the local, the state, and the federal level, and that's ultimately what's going to allow us to be even more successful in the future. Thanks.
Okay, I think we're ready now for Beth Osborne from USDOT. Take it away, Beth.
Very much. Sure. Can you hear me?
Certainly.
We can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So I wanted to talk about a couple program issues, and then I wanted to talk about overall opportunity going forward. There are a few things that were not mentioned in terms of the organization of the program that I think are worth highlighting. Even though they don't appear to be directly applicable to the work you all do, they will impact you in terms of the opportunity that's available, and I want you all to pay attention to those programs. One is the Project of National and Regional Significance. This is a program that was actually created in Safety Lieu, but was an excuse for a vast number of earmarks. Initially, there was an idea that it was going to be a competitive grant program, so there was a lot of criteria written out. It ended up being the host of earmarks, and so it was never implemented. In MAP 21, they've amended it and didn't earmark it, but they are now throwing it to the the appropriators to actually put funding towards it. So they, at the appropriations level right now, they are considering whether or not they want the projects of national or regional significance, whether they'd like to stick with something closer to the Tiger program, or whether they'll fund either. I don't think both would be on the table. One of the things you all should look out for is, as opposed to Tiger, projects of national and regional significance are only open to transit agencies, states, and tribes. One of the beautiful things about Tiger is that it's open to entities, any governmental entity, including those who are often struggling to get access to federal funds. That is not the case with projects of national and regional significance, or PNRF. Another thing is it has a minimum project size requirement that is very large. It is $500 million, or half of the state in which the project is located, half of the state highway apportionment. So for a smaller state, it's not quite as enormous of a project, but it still can range, anywhere from something along the lines of, $80 million in a state the size of Maine, or I think Hawaii is also about $81 million, up to $250 million for an Arizona, or $455 million for a Missouri, and then up to $500 million for the 10 largest states. And that is important because there are not a lot of bike ped and trail projects that cost that much. And it can't just be a group of trails that we dream about one day reaching $500 million. It has to be a project that's gone through preliminary engineering and is estimated to cost that. So that's something the appropriators are looking at right now, and you all should be aware of. The second thing I want to point out is there are performance measures that will be required in the planning section, and what those performance measures are and how they are made public, and how the states and MPOs are doing in meeting those performance measures, and how that is made public is something that your involvement will be important in, and of course which measures are chosen. And then the last thing is there's a lot of changes to NEPA, and one of the things that you all should be aware of is the public involvement piece in NEPA, and how that might change. Overall, we are just starting the process of MAP 21 implementation, and we're looking at creating an online dialogue so that those of you in the field who are deep on these issues can tell us what you think we need to be looking out for. I would love to say that we have lots and lots of answers already, but it is almost a 700-page bill with tons of deadlines and requirements, and we are just piecing it together right now. So your input and your thoughts are critical, and we are going to be looking for them in the next few weeks. So stay tuned there. And then the last thing I will point out is we expect reauthorization to begin almost immediately. In fact, at the bill signing, I ran into a congressional staffer who said that they were starting work on it this fall. And we all need to figure out how we need to adjust the conversation and the message before that reauthorization occurs. And when it comes to bike ped and trails, one of the things that is missing from the debate here in Washington is the federal hook. Why is this important to the federal government participate in? And the answer needs to be something that is attractive and exciting to both Tea Party conservatives, and, environmentalist liberals. And the area that I think is most ripe is to talk about the economic successes of areas that have invested in this type of infrastructure. I think about Indianapolis and their cultural trail, and the fact that by redesigning their streets and adding bike ped infrastructure along some of these strips of abandoned storefront have completely turned around entire blocks. Abandoned storefronts are now full for the first time in a decade or more. That sort of data needs to be put together and put out there because, frankly, folks here, certainly on Capitol Hill, even those who support this sort of infrastructure, were a little too easily bullied here into believing that it's something that's of local concern. So that's something for us to keep on our radar. The last thing I want to mention is this coalition was pretty impressive in terms of getting people's attention up here. There was a moment during conference where we thought enhancements and bike ped would not survive, period, in terms of being a dedicated pool of funds. And this group stood up a pretty aggressive campaign to make clear to folks on Capitol Hill, including the chairman of EPW, that those who walked away from these important investments would be held accountable, and that action most likely saved the program. There are a lot of other stakeholders that did not take as aggressive action, that feared taking aggressive action like that might result in them being kind of kicked away from the table. Turns out your strategy was the right one. And while I know you all feel beaten down, as many do, you all came out in much better shape than other interest groups, and I think that that is worthwhile for you to remember at this moment as you gear up over the next 2 years. So thanks for having me, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Beth. That's really quite interesting, quite informative, and it's always so good to have USDOT's perspective. I hope everybody's been watching the slide examples that have gone by as Beth was speaking of Tiger investments that have been made, that they're really so key to the communities, and there will be more. Okay, we're going to move to Q&A now. And the very first question doesn't tell me here from whence it came, but I think it's been on a lot of people's minds. I'm going to address this to Kevin, but any of the other panelists can, of course, chime in. And that is, are nonprofits eligible? And I assume that that means are nonprofits eligible to apply for transportation alternative funding?
Yes, nonprofits as such are not eligible to apply. If you have an interest in a project, the way to do it would be to partner with one of the eligible entities under transportation alternatives, and that list again is a local government, a regional transportation authority, a transit agency, a natural resource or public land agency, a school district, local education agency or school, a tribal government, and then there is a catch-all where a state can determine that some other local or regional governmental entity that has some responsibility for or oversight of transportation or rec trails, that they ought to be eligible for that state. And so there's that clause that you could try to invoke if there were another likely eligible entity that you wanted to partner with. You could get such a designation made.
Okay, and now we have a question from Idaho, which I think that since NRPA has such a wonderful grassroots reach, we're going to direct to Dave here. And the question is in Idaho, we want to develop a sign-on letter. It doesn't say to whom it would be directed. I assume it would be to the governor or the state DOT, but a sign-on letter supporting transportation alternative funding. And again, I assume it means supporting that it not be transferred someplace else. Do you have any specific suggestions for how to make that a successful letter?
Well, yeah, this is Dave, everyone. NRPA, we engage in doing these types of activities ourselves through our state networks and our state directors and state presidents. We would be happy. I can make sure I can make my email available and be happy to help even provide draft ideas for sign-on letters and so on and so forth so you can put this together. It just takes a little bit of work working with your state and local park folks to help make sure that you get this signed on, and then you can possibly go out to your broader nonprofit networks as well and try to get more groups.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Okay, next question. And this is one that we dealt with here at RTC. Question is, how will allocation work for TMAs that cover counties in 2 states? We encountered this at RTC when we did our map of Alabama that had a Columbus TMA on it with a population less than 200,000. Being from the South, I realized instantly that Columbus, Georgia was the partner in this, and so that we had a bi-state TMA. So Kevin, how will allocation work for TMAs that cover counties or jurisdictions in 2 states?
All right. I believe the way that will work is that the eligibility to play that role is going to attach to the size of that region. So if you're looking at a transportation management area straddling 2 states, you could be below 200,000 in one or both. But if you're over 200,000 in the combination thereof, then you're eligible to play that role. And then the only question would be, how do the dollars flow to you as that large MPO to play that role? And the answer would be proportionate to your population within each of those states that you have in your jurisdiction.
Okay, and now we have a question specifically for Beth. And Beth, you're asked to explain minimum project cost.
Certainly. So the way the statute reads is that there are some basic eligibility requirements for a project of national and regional significance application to be made. One is the type of applicant you are. So you'd have to be a state, a transit agency, or a tribe. The second is the project itself must cost based on preliminary engineering at least $500 million or half of your state's highway allocation. So basically, you would have a project. You would go through preliminary engineering, which is generally enough to be able to move a project into NEPA. And based on, something like 20% design, 30% design of the project, you'd have an estimated cost of your project. And if it reached those minimum thresholds, then it would be eligible to apply for the Projects for National and Regional Significance program. I think one of the things that the appropriators will look at is whether or not this is such a high threshold that there will be very few projects that can apply at all. The other thing is there's only $500 million made available to the program, period. So if you have to be that large of a project to begin with, how many projects could actually be funded? And that's something that the appropriators will have to grapple with. It maybe they keep it this way and we'll fund 3 or 4 projects total nationwide. But I think that there's concern about that because that makes a program an extraordinarily high-stakes program when there can only be 3 or 4 winners, and things that rarely go well when that's the case.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. And the next question is on Rec Trails funding, so I'm going to ask Dave to respond to this. Is RTP funding also sub-allocated to the TMAs?
That's a very good question. Does RTP funding get sub-allocated to TMAs? The answer is no. The program is currently, it still remains the same type of structure, which is aiming at a competitive statewide program. The state could allocate money towards those areas, but it still has to be done through the existing system of the program. So it's done through the competitive grant process.
Thank you, Dave. And then there's a second part to this question, which is what plans are there to work with motorized users to ensure governors don't opt out of the RTP funds? And I will take that one as the co-chair of the Coalition for Recreational Trails. which is in the process of developing a strategy and a plan for how we work together. As in the Coalition for Recreational Trails is comprised of both motorized and non-motorized and what we call hybrid trail users, but how we all work together to make sure that those governors don't opt out. Pooling our information about where the vulnerable states are and prioritizing those. So yes, that process is underway. And we hope, and our goal is to have no opt-outs for the Rec Trails program. Okay. Next question. Beth, I may toss this one your way. What is the status of the Scenic Byways program?
I think what we're finding in this bill that you just generally as an approach to it is most everything that was fundable through Safety Lou and our program before remains fundable. They're just not separate. They're now consolidated into other programs. And there is understandable concern about that because there's a reason these programs were separated. They were separated because they weren't getting attention when they were piled together. And that's something that is going to have to be hashed out at the state level since most of the funding will be controlled by states. And frankly, I would anticipate the next reauthorization you'll see some of these programs emerge back because there's a constituency that felt that those areas were not properly funded. But if you look through the 5 programs that were funded, you'll see very familiar eligibilities still being listed in there. One of the things that did not make it, there are a handful of things that did not make it. Some of the areas that have been subject to an enormous amount of scrutiny, like museums. Some of those things finally fell away. It was always interesting that Congress would criticize states for funding museums when they were the ones that made them eligible in the first place, but it looks like Congress figured out a way out of that internal inconsistency. But for the most part, if you look through the programs, you will find that most everything that was fundable remains eligible for spending. It's just eligible in a smaller number of programs.
Okay, thank you, Beth. And now we have a toughie for Kevin coming his way. And the question is, how would suballocation work for a smaller area within a larger county, in this case a larger TMA, i.e. Antelope Valley in LA County? So, Kevin, do you want to put on a TMA hat and see how you might answer that?
Okay, if the assumption here is that this area is within the boundaries of the transportation management area and you have that large MPO administering the funds and making the project selection, then there are no guarantees for any one particular geographic location that they will secure funds, so that basically they would need to get into the competition for all the projects covering the whole geographic breadth of that particular TMA. So it just comes down to the competition for limited dollars and whose projects rise to the top. But whether you're talking about the state competitive grants or the metropolitan administered grants, those bands of population are about communities of that size rather than about any particular community, and so nobody has a real guarantee here.
Thank you, Kevin. And in some ways, that's not that different from how it has been in most states in terms of the competitive process under ICT, 221, and Safety Lou. Working at its best, those decisions were made by the best projects rising to the top. And that's why most of the states ran the program. So, Dave, here's one for you. Now, don't cringe. If a governor opts out of the Rec Trails program, what happens to those funds?
I want to make sure I get this correct. In fact, I'll actually refer back to you. I want to make sure I get this correctly. The funding would then go back to the general transportation account. And they can use
that's correct.
Not use it for other.
Right. We had this question come up.
Yes.
We did it and checked it through FHWA because there was some thought that perhaps if a state opted out of if the governor opted out of Rec Trails in that governor's state, that those dollars would be made in a Rec Trails pool and be distributed to other states, but that's not correct. Is our understanding they would stay in the transportation alternatives pot for that state. Okay, thank you. Now, Beth, are you there? Here's one for you, Beth. Is there a deadline by which states must have sub-allocated funds available, or must make sub-allocated funds available?
I'm assuming they mean particularly within the transportation alternatives category. It's actually, we don't have to worry necessarily about the state making it available. What we have to make sure is that the area in question, and frankly the state, because remember, they've got half the funds, we want them to spend it, has the ability to run a competitive grant program quickly. And then the big question is whether or not they're able to obligate the money by the deadline. Obligation doesn't necessarily mean the money needs to be flowing because it's a reimbursement program. So when the funding is quote unquote allocated, it really just means that you have the ability to go out and obligate dollars. It doesn't mean that a check is being cut and sent to you. And then the question becomes, how are we going to define that word obligate? Is it going to be when an award is made, or is it going to mean what it is generally meant in our program, which is that you have to have gotten through all the planning and design and environmental reviews and permitting, and the project has to be ready to go to bid. And when it's ready to go to bid, that's when we traditionally obligate the dollars that can't be then utilized in any other area except for that project. Because that can take a while. And even if you run a competitive grant program really quickly and make announcements and work through those issues, doing that in a year's time, having been the office that's overseeing the Tiger program, it's really very difficult. So what we're looking at is the definition of that word obligate, and how can we help these areas run these programs quickly, and the states who want to run these programs quickly so that they meet that obligation deadline and that money can't be diverted.
Okay, thank you, Beth. And then this one is for you also. We have been asked for clarification. Is Tiger gone under map 21?
That's a pretty easy answer under map 21. Tiger is mentioned no place in it. The only competitive grant program that's really in the overall bill is the projects of national and regional significance, which is a pretty big sign that the authorizers have no great love for the Tiger program. Now the question is, what do the appropriators do? Because the appropriators, at least the Senate appropriators, do have a great love for that program, but I think that they are going to have a very difficult time funding their program over the authorizers when most of them voted for the authorization bill, and programs really generally need to be authorized in order to be appropriated. So that's going to be what they grapple with. But yeah, there was not a lot of attention put towards this during the debate. Tiger has never been included in any draft of any bill considered in either house. And so it really never had much of a shot. There was not much of a call for its inclusion, and it was not included.
So there you have it. Okay, Kevin, why would a state want to opt out of a program? Put your governor's hat on now.
We hope they generally or universally do not want to opt out, and I think that it is collectively our job to dissuade them from wanting to do that. But the short answer is, and the reason why these this additional flexibility is in the law is that certain states had made a lot of noise about wanting to move this money, divert it from TE and Safe Routes to School-like functions to their core highway programs, and that's what they are now allowed to do with a portion of the funds. And so it kind of comes down to political will and priorities at the state level. And I think many of us struggle with certain state DOTs having a culture that seems to be tilted in favor of highway capacity building, and so those are the ones we need to have our eye on and convince them that they really do need to offer balanced transportation choices, and that this is money on the margins, and it's very cost effective, and it's a real bargain that they need to have in the mix.
Okay, now wouldn't he make a good governor there? All right, Dave, this is another Rec Trails question. I'm not sure I know the answer. Matthew may have to help us out here, but Dave may know the answer. Says most Rec Trails programs have been managed by the state park agencies. I think all but 5 are. Does this act, does Map 21 require DOTs to manage them, or can they still be managed through the state park agency or state natural resource agency?
I'll take a first crack at it. I'm assuming that since the law is basically structured the same, and it's basically being continued with only a few minor changes such as the overall opt-out, I'm assuming that the control and the management could remain the same. I mean, Beth, are you reading that differently, or do you have any different opinion on that?
No, I interpret it exactly the same as you do. Frankly, it's been always something that was at the discretion of the states. There's a reason the states like someone else managing them, so I really don't think that that would change.
Thank you. Thanks for your help on that.
Okay. Yeah, that's my read of it, too. Yeah, there was a reason why they did that back when ICE was passed, and it's worked well. And sometimes one can hope that you don't try to fix things that aren't broken. All right, Beth, I guess this one's for you. And it says, will projects of regional significance be funded as pass-throughs in larger states like California?
So the projects of national and regional significance is one of the only DOT discretionary grant programs. It is an authorized program, which means it is subject to an appropriation, but it is something that would be operated as a competitive grant program through U.S. DOT at the Secretary of Transportation's discretion. So for California to get those funds, they would have to come and apply just like any other state, and they would have to get through the competition and be funded.
Now, here's one that might be outside our comfort zone, guys. Did any of the eligibilities for CMAQ change under Map 21?
That's a good question. One of the things that happened with CMAQ is there's an added focus on areas out of compliance with the PM 2.5 standard. And there's some language surrounding that funding that's very focused, particularly on technologies that will reduce diesel engine pollution, since that is often the culprit for PM 2.5, including clean construction. There was some similar language in Safety Lou, but not exactly the same. The other thing that is the biggest change in CMAQ is it is now allowable to fund a single occupancy vehicle roadway expansion with CMAQ dollars, so long as you can show that there will be a reduction in congestion. This is a mammoth change to the program, which has been a traditionally focused on, if it's roadways, it's focused on alternative forms of transportation on roadways, but also HOV lanes and maybe congestion pricing, things that manage the flow better on those roadways, but not new capacity highways, as other than the road builders, and certain state DOTs. There aren't a lot of people that think building massive new capacity reduces air pollution. And it was, like I said, a public health and air pollution reduction program. That has been changed. here. And so now one of the things DOT is going to have to do is analyze what that means for that a project needs to show that it reduces congestion, or for what period of time, utilizing what models and what data. How much does it have to reduce congestion? By a spec. So those are some issues that we will have to grapple with, and those are some things that, frankly, we'll be looking for input on.
Yeah, Beth, I completely agree that the single occupant vehicle, when it's not accessible during peak hours, is the biggest addition and one we really want to have our eye on. A few others I'll just mention real quick are turning lanes, real-time traffic transit and multimodal traveler information, incident and emergency response, and electrical vehicle charging stations and natural gas fueling stations. So there are a number of...
However, I will say that they're delineated now, but the way that CMAQ has traditionally been written by reference to the Clean Air Act, most anything that EPA determines will reduce air pollution was always fundable.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, now here's another one, guys. Can a state with a large currently unobligated TE balance let those dollars go elsewhere? Who wants to take the first crack? Governor Mills?
Wow, that's a great question. What's going to happen with the past dollars? I think that we're probably going, I'll have to ask around to be sure, but I think the rules for past years will continue to apply until those dollars are spent. It's not, unless Congress decides to, at some point sweep away any unobligated dollars, which they do from time to time. Anybody interpret it any differently than me?
I will cede my time to Tracy Haddon-Lowe.
Yield. Yield my time. Okay. Here's Tracy Haddon-Lowe, who's the director of the National Transportation Health Clearinghouse.
I just want to confirm what Beth just said, which is that FHWA is internally seeking final clarification on this question. So there isn't a definitive answer yet, but Beth's hypothesis is potentially a totally valid one, which is that the previous year's definitions and guidance will apply to the previous year's funds.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. And we have a note here. I guess Christopher has chatted in. Christopher Dowers of FHWA, and he wants to confirm that MAP 21 does not change the agency that administers the Rec Trails program. So,
thank you, Christopher.
Thank you, Christopher. Yes. Now, I would ask that our people writing down the questions from the chat room try to use a little better handwriting here. I don't mean to be too critical, but okay. Here's another one that's a little bit outside of our comfort zone. I want to say that, well, two things. Let me pause here a moment. We have reached the 2 o'clock mark, but we're going to continue as long as we said, as long as there's questions out there. But I do want to take note of that. And then also any questions on which we don't have answers, we're making a record of those, and we will get back to the participants in this webinar with that information as best we can. So here comes a toughie, perhaps not. Is mandatory side pass law for federal aid highways likely to be enforced? And now somebody's going to put on their hat of the state police someplace. And how is the bike level of service B determined? Is anybody familiar enough? Beth, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the beginning of the question. Could you repeat it?
I guess I'm not terribly close to the. Is the mandatory side pass law for federal aid roads likely to be enforced? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, how is the bike level of service B determined?
I think these are to be determined issues.
To be determined. To be D. Okay. That goes in that pile. So, next question. Did MAP 21 shorten the period of obligation for RTP, which was previously 3 years? Dave?
Again, I don't think, again, I want to stress I'm not an attorney, so I want to be careful about things I say. Please do not take this as stated law, but our interpretation is no. It's certainly the basic program is stated as is in that regard.
Okay.
And I agree. I've looked back at the language, and I don't see any changes to the way past dollars are utilized. I see a lot. I mean, all the language that I'm reading is amending the way that should be handled with dollars going forward, but it would require some pretty specific language to reach back into prior years, and you would also have to write it in a way that made clear that any money that was already obligated was not impacted. Otherwise, you'd have to unobligate dollars and possibly defund projects, which is a very unpopular thing, and there is no such language here. So I think in terms of past allocations, the rules are basically what we're used to until that money is obligated. What you should be watching out for is when Congress sees a certain amount of unobligated dollars and they need to balance the books, they seize that and take it away. And they've done that several times over past extensions and reauthorizations. So it's more that if the money is just sitting out there unutilized over the long term, that you should worry about it being swept up and put someplace else, not otherwise.
Yes, but we call that the big sweep. So we have to watch that our money doesn't get swept. And here's a question that relates to that. Our MPO has a backlog of TE projects that are on the tip, but design and permitting are not completed. What is the fate of these projects? Very dramatic. What is the fate of these projects?
Well,
Kevin?
I mean, I guess first thought is that TIPs and STIPs are plans rather than binding legal commitments, and so there's a political element to their fate. I think that we can use the fact that effort has gone into building those plans and they progress to a certain point, and to keep them moving. Inertia is a strong force, but I don't think that we've got guarantees in all states. States differ in terms of how they treat their work plans and what have you in terms of how enduring or serious they are about them. But I think it's going to be it's a state-by-state matter how that plays out. Beth, do you have any?
I completely agree with the way you interpret this. Frankly, amending STIPs and TIPs are not the easiest thing to do, and you upset one constituency, and then someone else wants something else amended, and then you've got a whole to do. It's not to say that there isn't a state that won't do it. It's not to say that there isn't an MPO that won't change things. That's something to watch out for. But it does require them to go through a process to amend their list of priority projects. And so that should require some public involvement, some notice, things for you to basically pay attention to. I think that, frankly, in the first year or so, there's going to be so much work going into figuring out what this new bill is that this might not be something that folks have a lot of time to spend on. So maybe inertia is your friend in that circumstance. And also keep in mind that while the funding pots may not be the same, these projects are still fundable. It's just discretionary. So there should be pots to pull from and continue the funding. The only question is, if there's no longer dedicated funding to a particular area, does a project drop in terms of its priority for the state? Because one thing that has been made clear by this bill is that the state is definitely king.
Okay, Beth, along those lines, here's a more pointed question for you and USDOT. Will USDOT encourage TMAs to honor DOT funding commitments within their region?
And absolutely, and we're going to do everything in our power to make it possible for the TMAs and the states to get the money out. I think the majority of the concern is not that the TMAs won't spend it. It's the state has. So, I mean, remember, I know we all, focus a lot on suballocation and getting the money to localities, but, half of the money is not going to be suballocated, and an equal amount of attention needs to be spent at the state level if you care about these dollars. We are going to try and help both entities spend their money appropriately. One of the things we're talking about is a model notice of funding availability, or RFP, whatever they call it. Everybody has a different name for it. Because I know that in our competitive grant program, just the of authoring that and clearing it takes so much time that you just lose too much time. And so maybe if we can develop some model language, it will allow those who are standing up a new program to move it much more quickly. And we are going to certainly look for avenues like that to help people move along. But the strongest way to make sure that money doesn't get moved around is to work with particularly your state DOTs, who are going to have the ultimate discretion on how friendly or hostile they want to be to these programs, to make sure that they stay committed to maintaining these funds.
Okay. Build up. What can I say? Okay. Now let's we have some questions coming in on Safe Routes to School. And first question is, will Safe Routes to School projects remain 100% federally funded with no local match under MAP 21? We have a volunteer again here, Ms. Tracy Hadden-Lowe.
The answer is yes. However, the rest of transportation alternatives is 80-20.
And Tracy, can you explain to people why Safe Routes to School will be treated differently?
That is what the law says.
Well, it's 1404 under safety.
Yes,
that's
Title 23.
That's what I was looking for. Yes, it's because of the reference in MAP 21 to Title 23, which is where Safe Routes to School is authorized. So, okay, great. Now, question, is there a deadline for obligating Safe Routes to School funds under Safety Lou? So that's the funds that are in the pipeline. Tracy?
Hi, everyone. While federal aid highway funds do not expire annually, they do technically have an expiration date on them. How this expiration date is or is not enforced by the Federal Highway Administration is a little complicated, but absolutely there is a deadline. Specifying what that deadline is more complicated, and in what unit of time it might be measured in, but funds cannot just remain on the books forever.
So I think
that's fair, and to put a little finer point on it, the way Congress generally looks at it, there's an overall 5-year grant rule. They don't like money sitting unused for more than 5 years in general. Now, we don't normally enforce that here at DOT, but Congress generally uses that as a measure of what funds are going to sweep up. When they find funds that are older than 5 years and they're taking some sort of action and they need to balance the books, it's useful to go and find funds that are 5 years old that nobody has spent. Because if they haven't needed it for 5 years, they probably don't need it, is the general attitude on capital help.
Right. So that goes to the point we've made before about other sources of funding, which is get your Safety Lou, get your Safety Lou money programmed, obligated, and spent.
I mean, heck, get your P21 money obligated.
Gosh. What about your IC money? Never mind. Don't give Congress any ideas here. Okay. For Safe Routes to School, will administrative constraints remain the same? I'm not sure what that means. Does somebody else, Tracy?
That point is unclear at this time.
Okay, well, I put that in the to be answered question, I call again. And then we have another question. This is not on Safe Routes to School, but a question is, what is the status of the Bike Path Highway Safety Improvement Program?
It's still there.
Yay! Where?
Under the Highway Safety Improvement Program section, 1112.
There you go. Got that? Section 1112. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, I missed one of the Safe Routes to School questions here. Are all Safe Routes to School activities eligible, including education? Kevin?
Sorry, I missed
Are all Safe Routes to School activities eligible, including education?
The interpretation of our friends at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership is that both infrastructure and non-infrastructure uses of Safe Routes to School funds are eligible.
Okay.
This is Beth. I will add in here, there's a difference between eligible and wise, unfortunately, and one of the things that folks need to consider as we are moving forward in another reauthorization round is the proportion of money in Safe Routes to School spent on educational materials versus actual, paint and change on the ground is one of the things that has resulted in criticism. And going forward, there needs to be some thought and strategy to what we can show in terms of infrastructure on the ground to maintain this program, because if there's a feeling on Capitol Hill that all we're generating are pamphlets, that is not a program that's going to last, forever.
Right. Okay. Point well taken. Next question. Will transportation alternative dollars be available for bike share programs?
That's something that we'll have to put forth in guidance, but I would anticipate yes. Bike share is something that's kind of emerged since the last reauthorization, and we had some conversations within DOT about whether or not they were eligible for Tiger funds, and since it was something that was so new, and we determined that it was, and we funded a couple of them. So I would anticipate that it's something that we would grapple with as we put out the guidance. But if past experience is any indication of future action, then the answer would be yes.
And certainly, Beth, if DOT needs any information from our community on the performance of those bike share programs, we will be ready to provide that to you.
I think it's going to be more about which parts of the bike share is eligible, because there are different parts of it. The infrastructure around the bike share rental, the structures where the bikes are locked in is interestingly easier to fund than the bikes themselves. So it's more that sort of thing that we'll have to grapple with.
Interesting. Okay, not a question. Can or should the bike ped community advocate for the continuation of Tiger?
The bike ped community can advocate anything that they wish. I mean, we are not shy about saying that we love Tiger. I'll be honest, in my opinion, there's been this strange reaction to the program, like everybody thinks that thing is sealed up and will be there forever. And frankly, we didn't think we'd have more than one round. The fact that we've had 4 has been nothing less than miraculous, and goes to the fact that Senator Murray of Washington has made sure that that program does not die. But I've been rather startled at the lack of, vocal support through reauthorization, but also through appropriations battles in favor of the program. We're starting to see a little bit more of it on Capitol Hill. There's Maxine Waters has introduced a bill on the House side to fund the program and authorize it over the long term. We're starting to see some more interest in the Senate. But, I mean, there's not even, I think there's been one sign-on letter on Capitol Hill, and I haven't really seen much talk about it from the interest group or the local government to, have eligibility through Tiger but not through other programs. So it's been a very interesting learning experience for me. People are very excited about it, but that has not really translated into them communicating with their congressional delegation that it's something that they want to see continued.
Yeah,
and I fall out of that.
Just to add, you're right to point to Senator Murray having been, the angel, and that this is played out as a year-by-year appropriations battle. It'd be nice if it were, worked into authorization, but it hasn't been. So I guess it continues to be that year-on-year thing.
Well, and what's important to know is that there was actual hostility to it from the authorizers. This program was invented by the appropriators, and there's a lot of tension between appropriators and authorizers, but it was very pointedly not included in MAP 21 or the House bill or, anything through conference. So, this is, and like I said, it was never even part of the debate. I don't even remember, other than Maxine Waters, anybody getting up and saying, "Where's Tiger? Why is it not this in this bill?"
Yep.
Okay, that will obviously unfold as Congress goes forward here. We have some clarifications from Christopher on the RTP, Christopher Dowett, I'm sorry, Federal Highway Administration, obviously on the cyber line. He says that in general, for apportioned funds, the deadline is current plus 3 years, and that once obligated, generally you have 5 years to extend the funds. So that's sort of the use it or lose it framework within which the RTP funds work. Okay, Kevin, I think that you addressed this before, but since it's been asked again, let's repeat it. Can funds sub-allocated to TMA MPOs then be sub-allocated to cities? All right, so that means sub-allocated to a jurisdiction within the TMA or MPO.
Oh, to make the project selection seems to be the implication.
Right.
Yeah, I don't believe it will work that way. Yeah, obviously the city can be an applicant and get the dollars, but the decision making we're looking to the regional agency to do.
Beth, is that your understanding of how this process is going to work? That the regional body makes the selection decision?
Yeah, and let me just say that there's already a lot of concern about the ability to stand up all the TMA's programs, states programs, and the idea of having a second round of sub-allocation sounds like a bureaucratic hurdle that would really slow down the obligation of these dollars, which is not what we want. It might be nice to have sub-allocation directly to the local government level, though this bill is pretty hostile towards putting money directly to local governments. There's really no programs that they can come into anymore. But whether or not they were eligible, coming up with a second round of sub-allocation, that sounds pretty dangerous in a program where if you don't spend the money within a certain period of time, it could be moved.
Right. Okay, we have a request that we repeat the eligible applicants for transportation alternatives, and so Kevin's going to run through that list again, which, by the way, is on page 94 of MAP 21. Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. 1, a local government. 2, a regional transportation authority. 3, a transit agency. 4, a natural resource or public land agency. 5, a school district, local education agency or school. 6, a tribal government. And then 7 is any other local or regional governmental entity with responsibility for or oversight of transportation or recreational trails other than an MPO or a state agency that a state determines to be eligible consistent with the goals of the subsection.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay. Now, here's an interesting question. What is equity bonus funding under MAP 21?
There is no equity bonus pot anymore. Equity bonus was a program created for the purpose of making sure that states got their proper allocation, and it was a very flexible pot of funding. Now, most of the programs are very flexible pots of funding, and it's handled through the new formula.
And what thing I believe is in MAP 21 is a guarantee that on this long-standing debate about states that are donor or donees to the Highway Trust Fund based upon how much gas tax they pay, that they will get 95% of their, at least 95% of their money back, which is part of how that whole political issue has been worked out.
However, let me state that there is no such thing as a donor state anymore. There hasn't been a donor state for years because this program has had to be propped up by general fund spending. We're not collecting enough of the gas tax to maintain the program. Therefore, every single state in the union is a donee state at this point.
Okay, so bye-bye equity bonus. Now, Beth, here's a good one. Probably on everybody's mind. When do you anticipate guidance documents will be completed?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And we're having to go through a very elaborate, very quick moving effort to determine what are the guidance documents that need to get out there, where in the bill will guidance documents not suffice, and we've been instructed we have to do regulation, and in those cases, can we do interim guidance while the regulations are pending because regulations take so long? There's a lot that we are trying to figure out. In some cases, we are instructed that they need to be out by a date certain. In some cases, it's more that we recognize for states and MPOs to do their job, they need to have them. So I think we're going to look to have a certain set of guidance documents out in time for October 1st when the new programs will take effect, and then other areas where we might be able to wait a little bit longer, we'll have to wait so we can make sure we do that part of our job appropriately. And you know, we have quite a task ahead of us. Thank heavens they gave us 3 months before the new program became active. Otherwise, I have no idea what we would have done.
We don't have any idea what we would have done either. So, okay. Well, here's a good question. What is the status of the clearinghouses? We have the INTAC with Papers to School, we have the Bike Ped Clearinghouse, and we have a Rec Trails, at least a keeping of the data, the database. So, who wants to take this one?
Actually, it's interesting. This is one where it might depend on the previous 3 programs because they're situated a bit differently, right? Safe Routes to School had about a $1.1 million, I believe, clearinghouse that was in the legislation of Safety Lou, and that's, you know, we'll see a guarantee, you know, the sense that that's guaranteed to be certainly not required by that 21 in the same way as Safety Lou. Then National Transportation Enhancements Clearinghouse, that's administered here at RTC in a cooperative agreement with Federal Highways. It's a lean and mean way that we've tracked the DE spending, and we want to find you know, a way to continue doing so. I think it'll be all the more important under transportation alternatives to know where these dollars are going and to be able to account for them and have that transparency and those opportunities to make the case for why these projects are so wonderful. The trails, I think probably you two are better able to speak to, but there's an administrative takedown there, so there's some opportunity.
There's administrative takedown, and so I assume it's up to those who administer the program if they want to use that administrative takedown to continue tracking the expenditures of the Rec Trails program. And what about the Bike Ped Clearinghouse? Beth?
Put it in the to be determined category.
To be determined? Okay, to be determined. Okay, now, here's an RTP question, Dave. Can RTP funds be used for trail maintenance equipment?
Yes, certainly can.
One of the purposes, actually, of the Rec Trails program was to create money that could be used for maintenance and maintaining trails, fixing and maintaining trails. And when we had our first Rec Trails meeting, after that passed in ICT, we had, sorry Beth, representatives from USDOT there that told us that the USDOT liked ribbon cutting. They didn't like to use federal money to fix things, and the trails community booed George Shaner, who said that, and said, no, the reason we got this passed is because our trails are in bad shape. They're doing damage to the environment, and our first priority for a lot of the youth here will be in fixing trails, maintaining trails, and that takes equipment. So it's a great program. Will DOT have a dedicated website to follow progress of transportation alternative changes?
We will have a website that is going to follow the overall implementation of the bill, and I think that this will be one of those things. And then just generally, you get to something I pointed out in my initial comments, which is we need to talk about a lot of things. We now have performance measures in this bill. State of repair is a really big part, and it's highlighted. Not necessarily in the trails part, but state of repair is very clearly highlighted as an area we need to track across the board. In highways and bridges, the hammer in terms of not meeting standards doesn't fall for, 2 to 3 years for highways and 7 years for roadways. So we'll probably be on the third reauthorization by the time we get that. But one thing that we all need to grapple with, and I am really looking for folks' input on, is what standards do you think need to be set and tracked? What should be set by the feds? What should be set by the locals? How should it be tracked? And how should the public be informed about states and MPO's ability to meet the standards that have been set? That's something that we definitely need to figure out.
Okay. Next question here. We have safety and beautification projects using TE dollars in our 5-year work plan for FY through FY 2014 and 15. Do we have to remove?
So, okay, yes. I think the answer is that if they're using safety lieu funds where those activities were eligible, then it's okay. If they're trying to use MAP 21 funds, then they're ineligible for the dedicated transportation alternatives fund.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is Beth. I am going to have to jump off the call at this point because I have another appointment waiting. But I did want to, again, thank everybody for coming together on this call, for your excellent questions, and please do not be shy about continuing to express your thoughts. If you have an idea about a way that we should be interpreting or implementing these provisions, we really do want to hear from you. Stay tuned because really in the next few days we're going to announce the ways for folks to do that. But if you don't want to wait, you should feel free to forward it to us now. We are all ears. We are moving forward, and we want to hear your thoughts. So thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for joining us and for the really highly informed quality of your responses. You're just really great.
Well, thanks for your time, Beth.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so Kevin and Dave, here we go. You're on your own. In California, we have split federal funds 25% to state, 75% to regions. Can the state keep and program any share of the TA, Transportation Alternative Funds? Got it?
In the state.
Can it apply for the funds in the state competitive grants program?
The state cannot apply for the funds, but I think it's a matter for guidance to figure out whether a state like California that has been suballocating at a greater percentage than what you would get from the MAP 21 formula, whether they can continue doing so. My argument would be that they should be able to continue doing so, and my understanding is that people in California are considering pursuing state legislation to indicate that preference of the state.
Okay, I hope that answer is satisfied. Sounds good to me. Okay, next question. Are transportation alternative projects to be treated as if on the federal highway system?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
We hadn't gotten around to mentioning this, and the answer is yes.
Except recreational trails, which we got.
But for safe routes to school and for transportation alternatives, prior TE, the answer is yes, and there are some concerns, particularly on safe routes to school and about that process.
Right. Now, that's a complicating one for us because it has things like low bid and Davis Bacon and things like that. Now here's a question actually for Dave. It might be for Christopher. Can a nonprofit apply for RTP dollars? And we know they have in the past.
Yeah.
So, Christopher, can you, if you're still there, can you chat in and give us a good response to that? Okay, this is, yes, that's Christopher. Thank you, Christopher. However, there is a possible use court. He says, however, there's a possible use court. Well, we know use courts. Exception. Okay. Kevin, are eligible activities for the Transportation Alternatives programs as a whole, or just Transportation Alternative Activities, formerly TE? Oh.
Okay, so maybe the way to answer that is there in the definition section, what used to be the definition of TE is now renamed Transportation Alternatives, and this actually points out a confusing point of the bill, the way it's drafted. So that those definitions are listed, and they include all of those, additions and subtractions from the definition. But then Transportation Alternatives is also the name of the combined pot of transportation alternatives, safe routes to school, rec trails, and this new road eligibility. And so I think that's where the confusion lies, is in that distinction between the definition and the combined pot.
Okay. Question for TE projects in the works. There are NEPA timing issues. Does an eligible project need to be obligated for construction in 2013? Everybody here in the room is looking at each other. First of all, does anybody understand the question? So there are TE projects in the works, 4 TE projects in the works. Right. There are NEPA timing issues. Does an eligible project need to be obligated for construction in 2013?
I think this question is not completely clear. This is Tracy Hatton-Lowe from NTEC, by the way, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that this question is related to the fact that we're expecting the vast majority of transportation alternatives projects to be now at the federal level given categorical exclusions from NEPA under MAP 21. This possibility existed in the past for transportation enhancements activities. At least it was not a federal requirement that transportation enhancement activities be given categorical exclusion, but that was certainly always allowed by the federal guidance and even encouraged, and it was up to the state to it was up to whatever arrangement each state DOT has with FHWA in terms of how NEPA is handled, and specifically with regards to transportation enhancements. So I would guess, make an educated guess, that states are going to have some flexibility in how they go about dealing with what they want to do for NEPA on TE projects that were added to their STIPs in previous fiscal years, but that haven't gotten to that stage in the project development process yet.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. We have an additional clarification for Christopher on the nonprofit rec trails question, and that is that nonprofits and RTP, it's up to the states, but nonprofits can be eligible for funding under RTP. Okay, now, what are the advantages of new transportation management areas versus MPOs? I'm sorry, but John Mytuck is not on this call, But Tracy is.
Just to clarify, transportation management areas are not new. That is a designation that existed under Safety Lieu, and they are simply MPOs that have a population of 200,000 or greater and that have been designated by the Secretary. Transportation management areas have some additional responsibilities beyond what is required of MPOs. They need congestion reduction plans and some other documents. But clearly under Map 21, there are a number of new things on the table for transportation management areas, including that they will receive this sub-allocated transportation alternatives funding. So that's why in the maps that we've made available on our website, we show not only the existing TMAs, but we also show existing MPOs that are large enough to be TMAs, but that have not sought that designation or have not received that designation yet from the Secretary. Those designations haven't been updated since 2002 and have not been updated since the 2010 census. So we are anticipating that this is a topic that will be revisited in every state in the very, very near future. And so that's why our map reflects the 2010 census and does not reflect strictly the Secretary's designations, because we're expecting that to open up very soon.
Yes, particularly if those are the administrators of our transportation. They're going to administer our program, and so they need to get themselves in gear here. Question, where is bike ped safety through DMV grants?
It could be DOT, but not. I don't think it would be the Department of Water.
DMV, right. So we don't quite understand that one. We'll see if there's some.
So yeah, I mean, I'm assuming the reference to Highway Safety Improvement Program. Again, that gets about 7% of the overall amount. It's for all kinds of highway safety, and so I'm guessing that's what the interest is on that question. Sorry?
Christopher is clarifying that they probably meant, the questioner probably meant NHTSA grants.
So that's the Federal National Highway Traffic Safety Administration federally, is that?
Right. So does anybody have an answer to the question then? All right, we'll have to research that one further. And then we have, I think that we've answered this, but we'll repeat it just to be sure. Question, will unspent sectors to school funds be available after September, or will they expire?
I think the answer is that they'll be there.
Right. they'll be there. And you know, we go into that area eventually where Beth talked about sweeping and things like that, but particularly if the state DOT wants to spend them, they can be spent. If they don't want to spend them, they'll probably leave them on the books and allow them to be swept. Now here's a question on the side path law again. Clarification, is it only for trails and national parks? Anybody know the answer to that?
Yeah, I thought that that's the context.
Right, that's the context in which it is in the law. Question, if the governor opts out of RTP funds, does the DOT take over administration of the program? That's not the way it would work. You want to, well, it's just that those funds would no longer be Rec Trails funds. They would be transportation alternative funds, and yes, those would be administered through the state DOT. Okay, that's a repeat question. Question, can TMAs partner with states to administer a single competitive program?
That is a great question.
Wow. We'll make sure that Beth gets this for her guidance.
One thing I'll note is that there's a clause in the portion about the regional competitive grant programs that require them to consult with the state. So while they're doing the project selection, when it's the region doing the selecting, there is a consultation requirement. Going the other way, that would not have been, I mean, that's not the norm, but it sure would be interesting to look at a case where there was willingness.
Yeah, I think it's a question for guidance because under the current transportation enhancement system, we certainly have some states that voluntarily suballocate their TE funds, but then give their regional planning agencies the option of returning their funds to the statewide pool if they would rather have their funds be part of a bigger pool so that they could potentially, if less frequently, get a larger award.
Oh, we should look that up. We have the list of technical amendments. I thought we were looking.
Well, here's the question. Was the single vehicle eligibility under CMAQ corrected as a technical error?
Okay. I've certainly seen people's bill interpretations in which they say that it still applies, but we do have documents of all the technical amendments, and we could go comb through there and see what the answer is, because we certainly weren't combing for that at the time we received the technical amendments. I wonder, since there have been a couple of questions about the safety program, if you want me to just say a couple of things that are in that section, just to make sure we're responsive to those questions. Okay. So while there's a lull in finding the next question. Again, we're looking at section 1112 of the law, and one thing that's interesting about it is it explicitly speaks to an improvement for pedestrian or bicyclist safety or safety of persons with disabilities. Traffic calming is noted, and signs and signals at school crossings is noted, and so on. It is all pursuant to state strategic highway safety plans. Those have to be comprehensive plans dealing with all modes, and state representatives of non-motorized users are expressly noted as a constituency that you've got to deal with. Then you've got the purpose of the program is to achieve significant reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads. I think that's a real opportunity for walking and bicycling advocates to show that bicycling and walking would be important to that, because after all, we account for a significant portion of the fatalities and injuries. So they need to have a plan. A state needs to have a plan to get funds, and they need to be looking at where are their hazardous locations and sections for bicyclists and pedestrians. Is one of the things they have to look at. Have to look at all kinds of motor vehicle crashes, and it's kind of interesting. There is a report in which they want to know about cost-effective roadway safety infrastructure improvements, and that might be an interesting opportunity for the bicycling and walking community to get ourselves into that report to Congress that's going to say what works and what's affordable to do to bring down those fatalities and injuries. So that's just a thumbnail of some of the opportunities under what they call HSIP.
Okay, and Christopher has sent in a clarification. Christopher Dowers from FHWA has sent in a clarification. I wanted to say Brewster School questions, and Karthik Chavera of RTC staff is going to read his clarification.
So Christopher, right? I think Davis.
Microphone.
I think look at here. I think state school funds are available to state and other federal education program enforcement. Available for current plus 3 fiscal years. Also, I don't recall that state school funds have ever been rescinded, so FY 2012 funds are available for obligation through FY 2015 or until fully obligated, whichever hopefully happens first.
Great. Now, I think that is optimal. In other words, the operative word there, they're available. Whether states choose to do that or not, that's a lot of, guys, that's up to us, up to us. And then we have another clarification on the question on state opt-outs on rec trails funding. If the state opts out of rec trails, for going forward into FY 2013, who will administer currently in progress RTP programs? And again, that would be left to the states to decide if they had any sense. If they decided to opt out, if they had any sense at all, they would let the projects that are underway would continue to be administered through whatever agency is currently administering them. And we have great confidence that all of our states have a lot of good sense and they will do such things. All right, we're coming to the end of the questions pile here. Here's one I can't read. Whose handwriting is this? Karthik. Would you read that question, Karthik?
To what degree can a normal transportation improvement project receive supplemental funding for enhancement components, such as a trail along a right-of-way?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Okay.
If the person who submitted that question would like to send in a clarification, that'd be good. And we have some, it seems like most of our other questions are repeats here. Yeah, we have a lot more clarifications from Christopher on the Rec Trails program. I guess he wanted to clarify and say it was authorized in IT in 1991, not 1992. However, let us say that it took effect in fiscal year 1992. So that's our...
Thank you, Christopher, for the clarification.
Right. And then the first funding was $7.5 million for FY 1993, followed by $15 million in FY 96 and 97. We expect FY 2013 to be $84.16 million because that is the amount available to the state. Thank you, Christopher. And Christopher also wanted us to point out that there's always been an opt-out provision in the Rec Trails program. And that opt-out, the way that was accomplished was that if the state did not have a State Trails Advisory Committee composed of both non-motorized and motorized users meet to advise the program, then they would not be eligible to receive funds. And that doesn't happen. So we hope that this good precedent of states not opting out continues. Now, it is true that the new law sort of draws that more clearly to the governor's attention, and that dollars are tight, but we hope this doesn't happen. So are there any more questions? One more coming. Let's hope it's a good one.
All right. You get a clarification on this? Do you want? Okay, because I mean, just looking at it, the question before that we weren't sure about listening to it is it seems if maybe you have a say a road or a rail project for which there may be a trail along that same right of way, and can transportation enhancements or not transportation alternatives funding be used for that trail? And the answer would be yes.
Okay. Here comes one.
Will the completion of sidewalks filling gaps qualify as a safety improvement?
Safety improvement.
Under what?
In other words, using the safety improvement program? Is that what they mean? Okay.
Well, I would certainly think
yeah.
so.
Yeah. Well, one thing we'll note with that is the Senate bill had a complete streets policy, a new complete streets policy. There's not a national complete streets policy like that, but it had been in the Senate bill, and that was removed in conference. So, so there are not, new rules about that. But I'm not sure that's what the question was. But it made me recall that we hadn't spoken to that issue yet, and it does relate to routinely accommodating all users for roads, and so. It could have had relevance to that question, but it didn't pass.
Okay, right. Okay, are there any more questions coming over that computer over there? I think we're all out of questions, or we're all out of ones we can articulate at the moment. I'm sure there will be more. I suggest everybody take Beth's offer. If you have additional questions or points that you think need clarification and guidance, please communicate those to DOT. They will have a easier way to do that pretty soon. we have an announcement to make about our next webinar. And this one will be more technical and drill down deeper. And hopefully at that point we'll have a better idea of how the TMAs are going to handle these competitive processes. And that will be July 31st at 1 p.m. And Kevin's writing me a note, which I can't read. Oh, it's intended for implementers. Or that's, but anybody can join, of course. But we want to have a lot of implementers on this this webinar. Do you want to say anything in closing, Kevin? I have some one closing observation.
I'm good.
You're good? Dave, would you have any?
I'm fine, thank you.
You're fine? The chat computer has gone quiet. Anything from the chat computer? We want to thank everybody for participating, both our panelists and certainly those of you, hundreds of you across the country who were online. It's really very exciting. I had my intern, who's here with us today, Ashley Fitzgerald, right before we came into the room, go and look up the comparison between T21 and Safety Move. And as we look at this new MAP 21 that has a whole different configuration and has all these competing eligibilities and what have you, we start from the premise that for us to when we have an edge in competing for this money, $108 million plus a year. And under T21, just keep this in mind, folks, under T21, we only had $400 million a year. Now, it was ours. It was dedicated to us. We didn't have to compete for it. But just think of all the wonderful things all of you have done with that money under the 7 years that we ran Safety Move, what we've got to build on, and our future is so bright. So I thank you all for participating, and goodbye.